Hey everyone, I'm excited to be introducing our Module 4 film, Hairspray, which is going to reflect our discussion on race, sexuality, and gender in portrayal in film. Hairspray is a really fun film. It's one of my favorites. Came out in 2007. I've shown it before in previous great performances on film class, the ones I taught face-to-face. And I'm glad to include it again. I felt we kind of needed a musical, something a little lighter, because we had shown, we started, of course, with a comedy, City Lights, an intense drama for Module 2, Streetcar Named Desire, and then last week's Carrie, a horror film. So I thought it was time for a musical. Hairspray has been done 3 times. This is the 3rd incarnation of Hairspray, so I'll give you a little background. It started out as a 1988 film, an offbeat independent film by filmmaker John Waters, known for his rather over-the-top satirical comedy films of the 80s. And then it was so popular in the late 80s, it became a Broadway musical in 2002. And the 2007 version we're watching is an adaptation of the Broadway musical. If you don't know the story, I'll just give you a slim rundown. It's also in our module. But it's the story of Tracy, well played by Nikki Blonsky in her film debut. She's just a dynamo in the movie. But Tracy is a very upbeat, hopeful, optimistic, rather feisty Philadelphia teenager in 1962, the early 60s. And her whole passion is dance and becoming hopefully a musical kind of star one day. And her passion is watching a local show called The Corny Collins Show on every afternoon, which this was popular at the time in the early 60s. These were dance shows that students, young people would watch, where other teenagers would come on and do dances of the time, and Corny Collins, the host, well played by James Marsden, was this slick kind of cool guy that kept up with the times and all that, and people just loved, watching this on their TV when they came home from school. Only problem with Corny Collins and a lot of these shows at the time is they were very all white, and this was how it was, and all the kids on the show were all good looking. They were Ken and Barbie types. And there was not a lot of inclusion of all types, and certainly no racial diversity or inclusion. This show had a obligatory once a month African American Day where diversity was allowed. But other than that, it's kind of an all white show. Mainly because, too, the villain of the piece, well played by Michelle Pfeiffer, Velma, the station manager, wants to keep it that way. She and her daughter, Amber, want to keep it all white and how it's always been. And this movie is during the Civil Rights era, looking at the cusp of change. Couple things to keep in mind. Cast is great. I mentioned Nikki Blonsky. John Travolta plays Edna, the Tracy's mother. And traditionally, this role is always played by a male in drag. In the first film, it was Divine in 1988, and Harvey Feinstein played the role in 2002. And normally the role is played very flamboyant and over the top. But they decided to hire John Travolta because of his past musical experience, dance experience, to portray the woman of Edna in a very normal, kind of overweight, insecure housewife way. She plays it in a subtle manner. She does break out in a dance and song, but things are very done subtly in a more realistic manner, and I think it works really well. Again, it's a great cast, including Queen Latifah, James Marsden as Corny Collins, Zac Efron, who did such great work last year in The Iron Claw. Really great cast. Couple things to keep in mind about a musical. A lot of my students love musicals, but a lot of my students tell me that they just it's a drag when people break out in a song. Things to keep in mind about a musical. Characters are using song and dance to express themselves and to express their emotions. And a musical, it's very important that the musical number brings the narrative forward, moves the film along forward. It is taking the narrative and moving it along, where in a lot of other films, dialogue would do that. So it's progressing the narrative. Also keep in mind, it's somewhat of a fantasy. You've got to understand, you've got to surrender to the movie. In this world, these people sing and dance to express their feelings, to express their emotions, to talk to each other. And what this film does really good, especially in 2 songs, Welcome to the 60s and You Can't Stop the Beat, is it really talks about that subtext of racial inequality, progression toward diversity, things that were happening in the early 60s with the civil rights movement. All of that is incorporated in the numbers, because really the whole point of this movie, and Tracy's our protagonist in this, she is driving the force home that change has to happen. The Courtney Collins show has to be diverse. The world has to be diverse. We have to accept inclusion and equality for all. And what ends up happening in the film is the Courtney Collins show becomes a platform for that. So keep all that in mind when you're watching it. It's a really rousing, fun show, but it's an important movie to watch because it's using musical numbers and somewhat comedy to bring across the very important subject of diversity and racial inclusion, which is something, sadly, that people are still talking about. We've come far since 1962, but we still need to move farther in strides. So keep all of this in mind. Comedy and musicals often are a really good way to address a social subject. It's very effective. Films like Blazing Saddles in the past have done that. So I hope you enjoy this week's film Hairspray, and I look forward to reading your discussion on it.